maybe we can kick things off. Okay, so hi, welcome everybody. My name is Miranda Cook. I'm a program officer at the Mass Cultural Council, and I am joined by Jay. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Jay Paget, Program Director for the Cultural Facilities Fund, and thanks for coming this morning.
All right, so we also have two ASL interpreters with us today, Michaela Jordan and Sean Kane. We are also joined by Erica Cook, who will be providing captioning for this presentation. Folks can access the captions directly in the Zoom platform or at this link that I am about to drop into the chat. Okay. Bear with me. All right, so this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Mass Cultural Council's YouTube channel later this week. Please feel free to drop questions into the chat throughout the presentation, and at the end we will have time for a Q&A. So, okay. You can find translation services available at massculturalcouncil.org for all of our web pages and applications, and Jay and I and our other MCC staff are happy to help you in the application process or find out any other Mass Cultural Council program information. So this presentation is on the Cultural Facilities Fund FY26 grant round. That's a typo. This is the FY26 round, so please accept my apology. But we are in the year 2025 still, definitely. So this is the FY26 Cultural Facilities Fund round information session. We offer 3 types of grants through the Cultural Facilities Fund. Actually, yeah, we'll just stay here for a minute. Capital, feasibility, and technical assistance and systems replacement plan grants will be covered in this presentation, and in the following slides we will walk you through the program guidelines and application process. Okay, so the CFF program is co-administered by the Mass Cultural Council and Mass Development, which is your state finance agency, and it is overseen by a governor-appointed advisory committee. At the Mass Cultural Council, we administer the application process, and for those who receive a grant, contracts and disbursements will take place with Mass Development. Next slide. Okay, the fund was established with 3 goals in mind. First being to enable thoughtful planning for maintaining and building cultural facilities, having public dollars invested to incentivize investments from private sources, and to encourage the sound stewardship of cultural facilities over the long term. Next slide. The CFF application is open now, opened on the 9th. The final application deadline is Thursday, December 11th, 2025, just before midnight. And announcements on the grants will be made next May 2026. Next slide. Entities that are eligible to apply to the program include 501c3 organizations that are primarily concerned with the arts, humanities, and/or interpretive sciences, municipalities that have cultural facilities that are at least 50% dedicated to the arts for cultural purposes, and that are at least 50,000 square feet in size. However, if the building is 125 years or older, The building can be of any size. Lastly, we can work with colleges that own cultural facilities that are open to the public beyond the student body. We'll go next. Okay. Before we go any further, we do have some important dates and guidelines for organizations that have previously been awarded a Cultural Facilities Fund grant and who want to reapply to the program. So past grantees are subject to some additional requirements. Capital grant recipients must observe a 2-year wait period before being eligible to reapply. So this means that if you received a capital grant in fiscal year 2023, your organization would be eligible to reapply in this FY26 round. However, if your org has recently received a capital grant after your FY23, you would need to sit out in this round. Feasibility and technical assistance grants must observe a 1-year wait period before reapplying for another feasibility grant. However, there is no wait period for feasibility grant recipients to reapply for a capital grant, as we see feasibility and technical assistance grants as the natural precursor to a capital grant. The only exception to this rule is for systems replacement plant grant recipients who can reapply for a grant before the SRP is complete. However, for all eligible grantees to reapply, it's very important that the prior grant is complete and fully dispersed, and all required documents are sent to Mass Development no later than by November 11th, 2025, which is 30 days before the application deadline. So for anybody who's received a grant in the past, in order to reapply to the fund, the prior grant needs to be spent down entirely. Next slide. Okay, so now we'll go over the 3 different grant categories, beginning with capital grants. Capital grants are available up to a maximum of $200,000. They have a 1-to-1 match requirement, as all CFF grants do. They can be used toward the purchase of a facility, renovation and repairs, new construction or expansion of an existing facility, final stage architectural design for a new facility, and for the purchase and installation of new equipment. Next slide. Okay. So the very first section of a capital grant application will ask you for information about your organization, such as your mission and programs. It'll ask you for info about the facility that is the subject of the application. So that would include ownership or leasing details, square footage, address, and then info about the project they are applying for and what challenges or opportunities may have led to you pursuing the project. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to get into the scorable criteria for the capital application. The first section, which is our statutory criteria, is on community impact. The application will ask you to describe the community need for the project. How do you engage the communities that you serve? And what measurable actions does your organization take to engage traditionally marginalized or underserved communities or isolated populations? How do you support your community, and how does your community support the organization? It will ask you to describe your organization's impact on tourism. And then you'll want to talk about local support. So I think you can think of community need as maybe output into the community that you serve, and local support as input. How do they pour back into you or demonstrate their support for you? Next slide. Okay, the next section is on financial capacity. So it will ask you to talk about the financial need for this grant, your ability to raise the funds to support this project. It'll ask you how you fund ongoing repair and replacement costs for your facility. And if your project is to expand an existing facility or build a new one, how will you financially support the expanded space? The next section is planning. So the application is going to ask you if you have a needs or conditions assessment for your facility. If you do, please be sure to include it with the application in the attachments section. And just as a general rule of thumb, if you are referencing any planning documents that have been done by your organization for the project that is the subject of the application, you want to be sure to include it with the application, especially if you're calling it out or you're talking about it in the narrative of the application. So this will also ask you how you identify building repairs and how this project fits into your overall facilities repair plan. And if you have an expansion project, you'll be asked to describe the demand that justifies the expansion, what planning your organization has already done to address the impact the project will have on operations and staffing, and your current capacity. Okay, and finally, the last scoreable section is on implementation. So here you will be asked when the project will be ready to proceed, or what stage the project is in at the time that you submit the application. And you'll also want to identify key members of the team. So what their role is in the project, what their qualifications are. And here you can upload any documents that they have provided, such as a contract, estimate, design plan, resume. Basically, you're being evaluated on whether you have identified an appropriate and qualified person to carry out the project that you're pursuing. Okay. So there are required supplementary materials as a part of the application. Project budget, oftentimes, depending on the scale of your project, the contractor or architect that you're working with might provide you a project budget. You might have several project budgets that are provided from the professionals that you're working with, and then you would want to compile them into one on your own. We do have a sample project budget that is on our website and also linked to inside of the application that you can reference. I can't stress enough, be sure to fill in the information as it relates to your specific project. You definitely don't want to copy and paste everything in the sample project budget that we've provided word for word. You want to fill out the specific details for your project. No project budget, no two are the same. So if you have any questions about that, please don't hesitate to contact JRI. But other than that, this is the list of our required supplementary materials. This is available on our website as well. And of course, you'll see it at the end of the application. And then there's also a space to upload optional materials. Okay. So our next grant category is feasibility and technical assistance grants, or FTA for short. FTA grants are available up to a max of $35,000, and they also have a one-to-one match requirement. They can be used to support architectural, engineering, green building, and accessibility planning. It can be used toward business planning or operations planning as it relates to an expansion or a new facility. And they can be used for capital campaign feasibility studies. Applicants may apply for an FTA grant in tandem with a capital grant if the FTA grant is for the purpose of planning for energy efficiency, green building, or the reduction of carbon emissions. That is the one role where you would be able to apply for both capital and FTA at the same time. If it were not for that purpose, you would need to choose between one or the other. So like capital grants, the first section of the FTA application will ask you for info about your organization, mission, programs, info about the facility, and ownership or leasing details, and for a brief summary of the facilities project that you are applying for. Again, the statutory criteria or the community impact section is going to ask you how you engage the communities you serve, what measurable actions your organization takes to engage traditionally marginalized or underserved and or isolated populations, what the tourism impact is for your organization, as well as local support. And this can be through the lens of your project and or your organization as a whole. You know, if you, let's say you were applying for a bathroom renovation, it might not make sense for you to base your narrative on how the community is just so supportive of the bathroom renovation. You know, maybe that doesn't really make any sense. So it's okay for you to talk about how your organization supports the community and how they support you overall, as opposed to for the specific project. Okay, so again, the application is going to ask you to describe the financial need for the grant. And then in project planning, you'll be asked to describe why this planning effort is the next logical step in your overall facilities plan for your organization. In the implementation section, You will again be asked to identify any planning consultants that you are working with and to describe their qualifications. And you'll be asked to summarize and attach the scope of work. So the required supplementary materials look familiar again for the feasibility grant. Budget, timeline, scope of services, financials, lease or deed. This is different here for feasibility applicants. So, you know, if your organization is applying for a grant to support the feasibility of purchasing a new space that your organization does not occupy. Of course, you would not have a lease or deed for that facility. And so in cases like that, you would not be required to attach it with the application. Submitting a lease or deed is optional for feasibility applicants. However, it is a required material for capital grant applications. The application wouldn't let you submit it if you did not upload something there. And then there's more I'll get into on that with the systems replacement plan grant application shortly. And here we are. Okay, so our third and final grant category is the systems replacement plan, or SRP for short. Grants range from $8,000 to $14,000, depending on the size of the facility. And they also have a 1-to-1 match requirement. The systems replacement plan is a 20-year capital needs assessment completed by a third-party contractor, which is pre-selected by us at the Mass Cultural Council. The SRP itself is a report. It is a planning tool for small to mid-sized organizations who own their facility and who want to get a sense of their building's needs. So just want to emphasize there tends to be some confusion about this product. This grant is not capital funds to be used to cover the costs of buying new systems for your facility. That would be a capital grant. Whereas the systems replacement plan grant is a grant that will cover half the cost of a product, of a report, of a planning tool that can be used by your organization to forecast your building's needs into the future. And we select that contractor for you who will come out and conduct the report. You would not be responsible for seeking a qualified contractor. So this is really an offering that we have to incentivize a good stewardship of cultural facilities. So, you know, when you're awarded an SRP grant, an engineer or consultant will come to your facility and perform an assessment of the building envelope, mechanical systems, and electrical and life safety systems. And this will be used to create the systems replacement plan, which is the financial forecast for the replacement of these systems, equipment, and building components. Next slide. All right, so like capital and FTA applications, there will be a statutory criteria, community impact section. But the SRP application will ask you to describe the original and current use of the building, describe the building's current accessibility. It will ask you to describe any recent replacements or maintenance considerations for various systems in the building. And for supplementary materials, the application will ask you for images, but most importantly, it will ask you to provide a deed for the building. Now, for systems replacement plan grants, it is required that applicants own their building. Your building would not be eligible for an SRP grant if you are leasing. Next slide. Okay, so as mentioned, maybe 3 or 4 times already, all of these grants have a 1-to-1 match requirement. The match must be raised and in hand or spent, or a combination of the two, before the grant funds can be dispersed to you. Capital grantees have 2 years from the date of the award to raise the matching funds. FTA grantees and systems replacement plan grantees have 1 year. However, if a grantee needs more time when the deadline comes, you do have the option to request an extension. Matching funds can come from corporate, philanthropic, or public fundraising. They can come from an organization's reserves or from municipal or federal sources. However, they cannot come from another state source or from day-to-day organizational operating funds, in-kind items, or debt. Pledges must be received and in hand before they can be used toward the match, unless the funds are contractually obligated to the project, such as with Community Preservation Act funds. Funds that have already been spent on eligible project costs can be used toward the match so long as the work was completed after September 1st of this year, 2025. Anything that has been spent prior to that date would not meet the window of eligibility for this grant round. Next slide. Okay, dates and deadlines. So, as mentioned, the final application deadline to apply is Thursday, December 11th, 2025. That is for all 3 grant categories. Announcements will be made in May of next year. And as a reminder for returning grantees who have observed their wait periods and are eligible to reapply in this round, if your prior grant has not been completed yet, you want to make sure that all final invoices are submitted to Mass Development no later than November 11th. And the one exception for that being SRP grant recipients who are not required to complete their project before reapplying. All right, now we'll get into the actual online application and walk through the 3 components of it, which are the eligibility quiz, the narrative sections we reviewed earlier, and the supplementary materials. All right, so to apply for a Cultural Facilities Fund grant, begin by registering in our online system. if you have applied to CFF before, any other Mass Cultural Council program, you're already in there. But if you have not and you're new to the system, you will want to go to the link here. This is, of course, available. You can find on our website, and I'm happy to drop that into the chat. Jay, maybe you can drop the link to the online system into the chat for everybody to access easily. But when you get there, there is a registration button where you can fill out your info on the organization. And for this program, you would be applying on behalf of an organization, not an individual, in order to see CFF as an opportunity in your account. Next slide. Okay, so once you're logged in and you see the 3 Cultural Facilities Fund applications under current opportunities on your homepage, you will you'll click there, you'll go to current opportunities, and you will see the 3 different CFF categories available for you there. Make sure you're applying for the right grant category, as they are all separate applications. You'll first be directed to a brief eligibility quiz. If your organization is eligible, the next page will bring you to the full application. If you don't meet the criteria in the eligibility quiz, or if your organization has recently received a CFF grant and has not observed the required wait period, the grants management system will notify you that this program isn't a good fit. But if you pass the eligibility quiz, you can proceed into the remainder of the application. You do not need to wait for us to contact you or give you the green light personally. All right, so once you're in the application, be sure to click saved, save at the bottom often as possible. If you are working on your application over multiple days, which most of you probably are, you can always come back to it by going to the in progress section on your homepage. Complete all of the required fields, including the attachment of your materials in the additional materials tab. You'll notice that all required questions are marked with a red asterisk. The system will stop you if you have missed an important required question, so you don't have to worry about that. But you will need to make sure that all of the required fields are completed in order to submit. And we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so again, up until the final deadline on Thursday, December 11th, Jay and I are available to answer questions, provide guidance. Please feel free to reach out via phone, email, and we are also hosting weekly office hours every Tuesday and Thursday morning from 10 to 11 a.m. up until the December 11th deadline, except for the week of Thanksgiving. You can register for a session or more than one session online on the Mass Cultural Council's agency dates page, and I will drop the link in there for you shortly. All right, so that is it for us. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this helpful, and now we will open up the floor for Q&A.
Miranda, if it's okay, I can walk through the questions. I'll just start at the beginning.
Perfect.
So we're going to answer questions. You can drop them in the chat. Some of them may be we'll try to not repeat ourselves too much, but the first question was, if you received a grant in FY24, when will you be eligible? You won't be eligible this round, you'll be eligible next round. You know, the fiscal years and the actual years get a little confusing, but if you got an FY24 grant, you sit out 25 and 26, and then you can come back. There is a question about mass development's underutilized properties grant within the last 2 years. That cool-off period for Cultural Facilities Fund does not apply to mass development's underutilized property grant. So they're separate. There's no requirement for other mass development grants and cultural facilities. There's a question about installing exhibits. And if you are building out fixed equipment in a museum and there's fixed cases and electrical systems and sometimes HVAC systems that are part of an exhibit, you can certainly include that in your capital grant application. The key point to take away with equipment is that the equipment must be fixed to the building. There is a question about submitting invoices by November 11th to mass development. And if you have already sent in your final invoices, you should be fine. We are in contact with mass development almost daily as those deadlines approach to just make sure everyone's sticking to the timeline that we've laid out in this presentation. So there's a question from Donna about, since our museum is both tourism-based Freedom Trail location and local community, do they weigh in the same scoring? Yeah, well, the tourism question is separate than community impact questions. So there's an opportunity to articulate benefit to tourism in one part of the application and community need and local support in another part of the application. So yes, you can articulate those in various places. There's a question about, do you need an organizational budget? And yes, in the supplementary materials, we request that you attach your audit. And if you're not required to have an audit, an accountant's review of your financials would be preferable, as well as year-to-date internally generated financials that you may not have an accountant have looked at it yet. The requirement that the building be 50,000 square feet and or 125 years old or older is only for municipal applications. It is not a requirement for 501c3 nonprofits or colleges and universities. So make sure you pay attention to that particular eligibility requirement if you are applying as a municipality. There is a question about the one-to-one match. It is a cash match, and in-kind staff time is not considered as a match in the Cultural Facilities Fund program. There's a question about, do capital grants cover the development of plans? In some cases, the final architectural, engineering, environmental plans are certainly part of the construction budget. So yes, you can include some final stage design planning in your capital budget. But if you are only applying for architectural work and other design work and not coupled with some capital expense, I would recommend you apply for a feasibility and technical assistance grant, or the FTA grant. Kim asked the question, the 2-year period to make the match is that in time, is that from the time the grant is awarded? And the answer is yes. So if you are awarded a grant in May of 2026, you have 2 years from that award date to raise the match. Bonnie asks that the Cultural Facilities Fund grants need to be approved by Mass Development, and they won't decide until October 23rd of this year. That's correct. Their board meeting was postponed a couple weeks this year, or this October. So in order for everything to be official, they need to vote on this particular set of guidelines and application. And in the past, everything that's happened until this part of the process has been approved by Mass Development for the last 18 years as we've done this. So we don't expect any hiccup in the process, but we just wanted to flag that as a legal date when the application's guidelines become really official. There's a question, is there a PDF of the applications questions so we can create a Google Doc before entering the platform? There is, Miranda, I can't remember if that's easily downloadable, or do we have to do that separately?
So there are a couple ways you can do this. If you want, just send me an email and I will forward you a PDF of the application questions, or you can access it on your own just by entering the application. So if you begin a capital grant application, you arrive at the narrative section. There is a blue button toward the left side of the screen that says application summary. That will open a pop-up window of a PDF of all of the questions in the form. You can print that, save it to your computer, and work from that if you prefer. If you have trouble figuring that out, send me an email and I'll be able to help you out and send it to you.
Anne asked a question about letters of support. They're not required. They certainly are helpful. We have third-party panelists read these applications, and there's many ways to demonstrate community need and local support. Sometimes it's, the participation of memberships, audiences that participate in your programming. In letters of support can also be part of the demonstration of local need and community support. So it's perfectly fine to include them. It's not a requirement. It's your call, really. There's a question about this recording. It will be saved. It will be on YouTube later this week, and we will share the link. Phil asked, wants more information on just what is required for the needs condition assessment. So what's required first is that you're eligible for the program. And once that occurs, you're filling in some baseline information so that the engineer and consultants can have a starting point for looking at your application. There isn't much more to it than that. You have to demonstrate there is still community need, local support, financial need, and benefit to tourism. We call those the community impact section, but those are derived specifically from this legislation that created the fund. So with the needs assessment, you cover the statutory materials, you're eligible for the fund, and then you provide some baseline information about your facility. There is a question about if we apply for both a capital and an FTA grant, do they have to be for the same project? So there's only one exception when you can apply for a capital and a feasibility grant or an FTA grant. And that is if the FTA grant is completely centered on decarbonizing or greening or making your building more energy efficient. Otherwise, they're completely decoupled. You have to pick one or the other. The reason we allow an FTA grant with a capital grant is to incentivize starting to move to the 2050 net zero emission targets that the state has put in place. And we do have a webinar helping you think through this on November 7th, and Miranda can drop that webinar in the chat. So you cannot apply for both, with the one exception is if the FTA is to totally make your building more energy efficient and electrified. There's a question about new grassroots organizations looking for funding support for leasing the facility to start your mission. So we see startups, and generally startups are in the planning phase, so you can certainly apply for a feasibility grant, and you do not have to have leased or own the building because you're testing out maybe various scenarios. So it's perfectly fine to apply to the fund with a feasibility grant, and you don't have an agreement or a lease for the facility yet. There's a question about, we used to lease our building, but won the bid to buy it. The closing hasn't occurred yet. It may not occur until after the deadline. I think it's perfectly fine to still apply if you're tracking towards buying it, but you're currently leasing it. That seems perfectly fine. And I guess I'll just take the opportunity to say that Miranda and I will both be available for office hours every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. between now and the application deadline. And we can certainly delve into some of the details of your project during those sessions. Yes, all the grants must be matched 1-to-1. That's true. It's also true that the matching funds cannot come from the state of Massachusetts. So if you work for a state university, and in the cases of universities and colleges, we've mostly only funded galleries and theaters. But the match couldn't come from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It would have to be another source. There's a request, Miranda, to show the slide with the key contacts again. That would be your and my email. There's a question about applying as a municipality and clarify the scope of financial documents. For the review panelists, looking at the municipal financials is not as helpful, but we do require that if you are a municipality and just say you own and operate a theater, we want to see the financials for that theater, the operating costs, the expenses, just how this particular facility that you are applying for, what is its financial profile. So if you're a municipality, there's no need to drop in the municipal's fiscal budget, but you have to drop in the facility's annual budget. There's a question about for-profit companies eligible if the structure is improved. For-profit companies are not eligible for the Cultural Facilities Fund. 501c3s, nonprofits that are primarily concerned with arts, humanities, and interpretive sciences are the only entity beside municipalities and colleges that can apply. We usually get a couple hundred applications every year. That's somewhat split between capital and feasibility. Lately, it's been close to 200 capital and maybe another 40 to 50. So it's a little north of 200 the past couple of years. But there is also a question about how do you treat already donated funds? Do they count towards the match? Yes. If you have funds that you've raised for the capital project and you raised it 5 years ago and it's sitting in a reserve account with your organization, it's perfectly fine to use those funds as a match. The clock actually doesn't apply to the matching fund window. It can be if funds raised at any time for the purpose of this capital project. There's a question about eligibility. If you're a nonprofit service organization that provides art therapy and other programs, but that's not primarily your mission, you would not be eligible. So we can have that discussion, but your mission, we look at your mission, we look at your programs, and if you're primarily an arts, humanities, or interpretive science organizations, you would be eligible. There's a question about, can a capital grant be used for exterior projects, accessibility ramps? Or does the work need to be inside the building? It could be either. Outside the building, you can work on the grounds, you can work on the exterior of the building, and of course, you can work on interior improvements as well. Grants are typically announced in mid-May of 2026. Yeah, there's a question about fixed equipment that is fixed to the walls, attached to the building, can't be taken out on the weekends. It's fixed capital equipment. You can also apply for acquisition with the Cultural Facilities Fund. The P&S does not have to be included in the application, but there has to be, trying to get to the rest of the question here. Yeah, you don't have to be, the P&S is the purchase and sale agreement. That does not have to be in play or signed at the time of application. If you are awarded a grant, you'll definitely have to have more legal commitment documents in place before the grant is dispersed, but not at the time of application. The dollar range for capital grants is up to $200,000. There's no floor, but the 200 is the ceiling, and they're all a 1-to-1 match. capital grants are available for rented spaces, but you have to make the distinction, and this is evidenced through the lease, that this is your responsibility as the lessee, this capital work. So we're pretty strict with that. Want a bright line between what is your responsibility and what is the landlord's responsibility. And if you're at the end of your lease term, you have to give us some confidence that you're going to continue leasing this this facility, which would warrant public dollars to be invested into a leased facility. There's a question about how does the fund define accessibility to the public? And use the funds to expand that capacity would align to the fund's goals. I mean, I think the basic idea is that we are funding facilities that offer performances, exhibits, classes, experiences that you and I can attend, readily accessible to the public. So if there's additional questions around what exactly that means, you can certainly send us an email or drop into the office hours. There's a question about the success rate of grants. I think we're probably hovering around 30 to 35% success rate with applicants to grants awarded. The average size of grants is probably close to $100,000 for the capital grants. The feasibility grants go up to 35,000, and I would say that the average there is probably between 15 and 20,000. There's a question about, can a capital request be for two separate projects? And the answer is yes. We see that quite often. There's a menu of capital needs, whether in this case it talks about the foundation and the HVAC. And yes, that's very common to see you working on multiple fronts to address the needs of renovating and repairing and maintaining your building. I think I just got through the questions. And we realize this is a pretty fast download of a lot of information that can sometimes has to be more nuanced with the conversation. And that's why we offer office hours a couple of days a week to get into their details.
We do have a handful of additional questions in the Q&A section, Jay. I don't know if you want to quickly go through those.
Okay.
I'm happy to read them off. All right. Can you speak to the eligibility of applying for multiple grants a bit more? So I think we've answered this a couple of times. Is that? But I'll go.
Yeah.
You can apply for one grant at a time with the exception of systems replacement plan grants, which can be applied for with capital or FTA, or you can apply for both capital and FTA at the same time, only if the FTA grant is for the purpose of greening your building. Jay, so as I was answering half of these, so if you had already answered any of these out loud, feel free to stop me. Otherwise, I'll answer them now.
Okay.
How do you treat already donated funds? Do they count toward the match? We've been fundraising for a while. Donated funds, assuming they are from corporate, philanthropic, individual sources, they would be eligible toward the match. Would an HVAC system count as renovation repair or installing fixed equipment? I think that would be fixed equipment. Regarding the review criteria for capital grants, can you expand on what begin the project within 12 months can mean? For example, if you are applying for funds to support final stage design, does begin the project mean begin those final designs or start construction? If you're applying for a grant to support the costs of designs, that would mean when would you begin working with the consultant? When would the architect begin crafting those designs for you? Are these grants for nonprofits only? So there are 3 groups that are eligible to apply to CFF, one being 501c3 organizations that are primarily concerned with the arts, humanities, or sciences, colleges that have cultural facilities that serve the public, and municipalities that have cultural facilities that serve the public. Any limitations on geographic base for consultants or architects? Specifically, is a Vermont-based architect licensed in Mass to practice? Okay. Yes, that would be okay. We will send a link to the slides and to the webinar recording to everybody who is on today. Yes. Okay, would installing HVAC in our building used to store collections be eligible for a capital grant? The answer is yes. Okay, can the match include local CPA funds? Also yes. How are funds for the match designated as being for this grant? If we are currently fundraising, can that be counted as part of the match? Also yes. Are there grants that are not required to match for my building? Would be, oh, I'm sorry. Let me read this in my head before I say it out loud. Okay, so I see a question from Barb John, but maybe just reach out to us directly so that I can get some more information about what you're asking. Is there a time frame for when capital grant projects need to be completed? So there would be a completion date that would be in your grant contract once it is executed with Mass Development, and that will be determined between you and them.
I could probably add that that's a very generous time frame, and as Miranda mentioned, after you match the grant, you enter into contract with Mass Development, and you will work with them, and you can say, oh, this is going to take 18 months to complete, and that will get baked into your contract. I just wanted to mention that.
A question from somebody in Springfield: should I make an appointment to meet with Mass Cultural in Boston? So we offer weekly online office hours. Those are over Zoom. So you're welcome to join an online session. No need to come in person. So organizations are not required to receive a feasibility grant before they are eligible to apply for capital. You can go right in for capital. It entirely depends on the project you're applying for and what stage in the project your organization is at. Are these direct or reimbursement grants? So you could consider these reimbursement grants. So once you have an invoice for the work that is being completed, you would submit that to Mass Development, and they will wire the funds to you. But they hold back the final 10% of the grant funds until you have submitted invoices totaling the full project costs, being the match plus the grant that you were awarded. Can the capital grant be requested for rent to own? So we would not be able to use the capital grant funds to cover the cost of rent, but it can be used for the outright purchase of a facility. If the grant we are applying for is to plan and fund the repairs and restoration of an aging historical facility, what is the better grant category, feasibility or systems replacement plan? So it wouldn't be, well, okay, so both the feasibility grant and the systems replacement plan they're both for planning. So a systems replacement plan grant is for organizations that own their facility. It will give you a 20-year forecast of your building's replacement needs. It'll be a planning document, whereas a feasibility grant can be sought for specific analysis or planning studies as it relates to a specific project that you want to take on. So that being said, we probably want to know more about what your organization is trying to do, and you might be interested in attending an office hours session.
I could jump in just quickly with a distinction there. The feasibility grant can be used for assessing the building's needs. And it's a larger grant than the systems replacement plan, and you can tailor that in really specific ways. So it's more flexible, the feasibility grant. The systems replacement plan grant is a prepackaged capital needs assessment where they're going to go through a checklist of building systems and building foundation and building envelope and give you a 20-year replacement plan for all those components. So there is overlap, but the feasibility grant is a larger grant and can be designed more specifically for your needs.
Okay. We have a question about an arts-focused youth program or nonprofit organization that is expanding into a larger space. Would we be eligible if our youth program is arts-focused? So, of course, you would need to be a 501c3 that is primarily concerned with the arts, humanities, and sciences. It is okay if your primary audience is youth. That's all right, but in order to meet the eligibility, you would need to be a 501c3, and your organization would need to have its primary focus on the arts and not education or you know, not a public school, private school, or social services organization. Okay, if the purchase of a building is part of the plan, does the purchase price apply to the match, down payment, or total mortgage amount? So, you know, capital grants can go up to $200,000, and of course has a one-to-one match requirement. So, you know, let's say the building is $400,000. You know, the match would cover half the cost of that, and your portion that you would pay toward the purchase of the building, you know, could count as the match for the grant. Can the match be from a municipal source? Yes. Okay. just going through, I think we have some duplicate questions. Okay, if applying for a capital grant for an acquisition, does the property need to already be chosen and the PNS signed contingent upon this grant funding, or is there a grace period to confirm the property? Jay, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, you don't have to have the PNS. But you would have to choose a property. It wouldn't be just, you wouldn't get approved of a grant just to shop around for property. And I must say that if it's an acquisition grant, we want the business plan fully cooked, right? So you know what your capacities are, there's a demand for this type of programming in your community. You've figured out the operational model, and you've got a good financial sense of how this is going to work. So it's not sort of an open-ended land banking, building banking kind of fund where you can just go out and have some money committed to find a project. You should identify the space, you should identify the business plan, and then you do not need to have it under agreement with the purchase and sale. And that is the concession I think we can give, because the purchase and sale sometimes might be 6 months or 8 months. And given this grant takes a while to run through the process, we eliminated that as a requirement a few years ago. So hopefully that is helpful.
Okay, so we have a question asking if we can speak to why the municipal square footage requirements are so large. What about a small town with no buildings that large, or a small nonprofit wanting to use the capital grant to install fixed display systems in a municipal building? So, yeah, the municipal requirement that a building must be either 50,000 square feet or larger, or 125 years old in order to be eligible, unfortunately, it's kind of an outdated guideline that was established at the start of the program. We are actively seeking to amend that in the future. However, it hasn't happened yet. So, we realize that it presents some challenges for folks, and we're trying to fix that, but we do have to adhere to it at this time.
That's a legislative statutory requirement that came to you from the legislature. So that's who created the fund. So as Miranda said, we have to adhere to that. We did not advocate for that. And in fact, we're advocating for an amendment right now to do away with those requirements. But they're still in place right now.
Yeah. So, as for small 501c3s that are located within municipal buildings, if you're leasing a space in a town-owned building, you could be eligible to be the applicant. If you fit that scenario, and the municipality does not meet the size or age requirement. So that, and this was an anonymous attendee who submitted this question, but if that's your situation, you might be eligible to apply for the building project on behalf of the 501c3 renting the space. The catch is the project that is the focus of the application would need to be the 501c3's legal responsibility per the lease, and not the legal responsibility of the town. So you want to be sure to to review the language in the lease to ensure eligibility. So I think we've gotten through just about all the questions. thank you all so much for participating. I hope you found the session helpful. As we said, we're hosting weekly office hours every Tuesday and Thursday morning, all the way up until the final deadline on December 11th. Please feel free to register for a session. They are informal. They are not presentations. You can drop in, drop out, get your questions answered, and then hop off. Or of course, Jay and I are also available via phone or email.
There's just one, I just want to be clear that the municipal requirement, the question from Catherine, is it size or age or both? It is size or age. So in other words, the municipal building should be 125 years or older, and it doesn't matter how big the building is. So it's one or the other. So,
Okay.
yeah, thanks everyone. And we'll be seeing you in office hours, and certainly you can reach out via email as well to us.
All right. Thanks, everybody.